Welcome again to Lakeshore Focus, a weekly show highlighting the key issues, events, and people in our region. I'm Keith Kirkpatrick. 2013 is nearly over. As we wrap up the year, we reflect on the good and the bad of this past year. We also think about what we learned about in the news. We watched TV, read the papers, listened to the radio. What were the stories that held our attention and made us want to know more? Here with us in our studio are two veteran writers from our two major newspapers in the region. Crista Zivanovic with the Times and Jerry Davich with the Post-Tribune. We're back again. This is our third year, right?
We are.
Yes, it is our third year.
Yeah. And at some point we'll have a little 5-year anniversary if we keep doing this, right?
It's hard to believe a year has passed. And I'll bet viewers would think the same thing.
Yeah.
On whether it's top news stories of the day or just their personal lives. But a year has passed since we've done this. And so much has happened, and in many ways, so many things have not.
And you know what? What's interesting is you guys every time come. Krista's all prepared, and
hey, I'm kind of prepared.
Jerry, I've
got notes.
This is actually slapdash. It looks prepared because I can't keep it all in my pea brain.
I know you're prepared. I was just.
But there's so many news stories to kind of pick and choose.
We were looking over each other's, and we often pick different ones, which is even more fun.
So we always try to talk about maybe the top 10 story. I mean. And I give you guys some preparation. I mean, what went through your heads as you were kind of thinking about what you were going to pick?
Krista?
I drew a blank because I'm always living in the future. So I'm thinking about editing our Sunday stories for this coming Sunday and the week after that. So I had to actually sit down and think, But it's funny because once you start thinking, then you get on a roll, and everything comes back to you.
Is that kind of a journalist thing that you kind of like stories are over, you're done with them?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, just enough so that you can focus on tomorrow and next Sunday and next week.
Right.
But you have to remember a lot of them because every little change that occurs, you have to remember everything else so you know how to put it in context and where to put it in the paper and online.
That's interesting. What
I was thinking between newsy versus chatty. There's news stories that really matter. It's news. It affects Northwest Indiana very much and impacts us. And then you have chatty stories, things that happen that may not be as newsy, but they're interesting. People can't let go of them.
Right.
People can't stop talking about them.
Have you canned that term yourself, chatty, or is that kind of a media thing?
I just made that up, I think.
You just made it up? He's going to claim it. You're
writing
a book
about it. It's like water cooler conversations.
Exactly.
You go to the next day, you go to work next day, you talk about that kind of a story. It may not be as impactful as some of Krista's stories that she's going to bring up because these are news. She's a news person.
Actually, though, this is how we decide sometimes what to put on A1.
And you got to balance the page,
If we're yakking in the news meeting and we get on some extraneous subject, we all look at each other and say, we got to put that on A1.
People are going to talk about it.
We care this much about it,
Even if it's just gossipy to talk about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. So as you went through, how you guys want to tackle this? Just want to kind of throw out some stories?
Yeah, let's just throw out some.
Did you rank them?
No.
Or not? So just kind of picked
some
of the top?
No, I did not. Not of importance, so to speak.
Right.
No.
Well, I think we always let Krista go first.
Of course.
Okay? So give us a story.
I think it's right now, big on my mind is the continuing shell game with taxes in the state of Indiana. Not just because Lake County enacted its income tax, which oddly enough the Republicans in Lake County were totally against, and yet it was the Republican legislature that sort of held Lake County hostage because we were the only county of all 92
the last county of the state.
Who did not want to enact them because they would only be on people's personal income tax and not business tax.
And Lake County fought tooth and nail for many years.
But now we have 1.5%, which is kind of hefty, and it might go up to 3% if we're going to make up the shortfall if the governor gets his way now. He wants to do away with the corporate personal income tax on property. That's $1 billion. That's $110 million in Lake County and $25 million, no, maybe more, $40 million in Porter County. That goes to schools, that goes to roads, that goes to other projects. So we might be paying more in personal property or personal income tax. And also, I didn't realize our sales tax. Us in California are the highest in the nation. We're at 7% now.
Wow.
So that is also helping us. So it seems like more and more is going to be put on the backs of people. As a lot of municipalities now are having to raise taxes, property taxes, and all these referendums. I spoke about this last year, and I remember saying this would be the big story this year. And yes, indeed, we've got 6 or 7 municipalities that have done it, and more of Valparaiso and others that are considering it because we have the property tax cap.
I think you've covered 4 stories here.
It's taxes. It's the shell game.
Very clever.
My point is you're going to pay one way or the other.
Right.
And it's usually the little guy. Even our our Republican columnist Mark Chase was saying the governor needs to really think about this. This $1 billion, we've already cut the inheritance tax. We've done away with that, and that's $155 million that we're never going to see again starting in 2014.
But you know, you're right. I mean, that's kind of like one big continuing story all last year, and will be a continuing story for the next probably several years. So it's kind of the A version, B version, C version.
And the only reason, and then I'll shut up about it, the only reason that I think it's my top story is because it's one of those that's so boring to have to force yourself to read about, because you have to think, and it's like ice pick to the forehead, but it's so important to all of us in our pocketbooks. So we've got to force ourselves
and you
to
mentioned the
swallow that bitter medicine.
Little guys care about this kind of a story because they know it affects them.
Or they should.
We all know. I'm a little guy, and trust me, and I know how this affects me.
Me too, I'm a little guy too.
So what's your ice pick to the head story? I like that one.
Oh, I don't have an ice pick to the head.
You know, I have only interesting chatty stories.
No, I have a talk, like heroin-related deaths in Porter County again.
Yes.
And
in Lake now.
And in Lake now, it's steeping in. And we seem to write about the same issues. And you know, we get desensitized in a bit by writing about this, but I've talked to more families with heroin-related deaths again in Porter County specifically, but also Lake County, and suicide rates again are up. Homicides in Gary, I'm like the downer here under the table, but the homicide rate in Gary, it's a huge issue.
53 this year so
at least in counting, and there's still a few days left of the year.
We'll talk about, was there one of those heroin or drug stories that just really grabbed you that's like, wow?
I attended a funeral for a gentleman. I can't say who he was. He was in his early 20s, a good kid being raised at a good school with good parents. You know, it's a whole stereotypical demographic. And all it took is one, you know, whether it's a slippery slope, trying it once. So many people I talk with who are users say they just wanted to try it once. They wanted to get that feeling once, and of course you can't go back after that once. And 2 years later, after being a user for a couple times, he took his own life.
How do you even spin that story after a while? It's like, you know, those stories almost got to be similar each time.
They are very similar. Well, when I talk to social service agencies and people on the front lines, including Frontline Foundation out of Chesterton, who deals with these kids, if you could save one or two of these future kids from taking their life or ODing, that kind of thing, that's how you spin it. You know,
I think we try and write positive stories. I know we've written several positive stories about young people who have been clean from heroin for 3, 4, 5 years, living elsewhere, and we try and write about their successes.
Show it's possible.
We hear about
Show it's
them.
possible.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's a great.
I guess that's how to. You hate to say spin it. You're talking like a journalist here, but yeah, how do you spin that? Where's the angle? Where's the nutcraft? But that's how you spin it.
Well, otherwise, why read another one of those stories if there's not something to gain from it?
Something at the end, a takeaway.
And you do hope maybe somebody will tell that story and it will touch somebody in a positive way.
And they do eventually. Some do, and we hear back from some of these social service agencies that'll tell us, you know, thanks for the media coverage to this, because a lot of these issues like to be swept under. Politicians don't want to talk about it.
Oh, I think they're rife in our schools. I think that's the dirty little secret, and that's a story that's very hard to get at.
And they don't want, and a lot of the schools don't want to open their doors to a lot of these users and people who've been through this, because they're afraid it's going to introduce this lifestyle to students, not warn them of staying away from it.
So
that's the conundrum.
So we've covered taxes and drug abuse. So
we need death. Yeah, well, we did death too, so we got death and taxes done, I guess.
Well, and Gary murders. I'll throw this out there. The Ileana Expressway.
That was on my list.
Very controversial, mostly to people in Lake County, 47 miles. It's probably going to be a done deal now, because now they're able to go to the feds and ask for the money. It's probably going to be a public-private partnership. It'll be a toll road.
It'll be a tollway, right.
And I found it very interesting, though. I really understood and could empathize with Hammond Mayor McDermott's views, because he's very concerned about loss from the northern cities. And I felt that exactly. And that's what he's concerned about. Others are concerned this will feed right into the Piotone as a third airport. Interestingly, Mayor Karen Freeman Wilson voted for it. And she has, you know, when the Times, we did a one region luncheon a few months ago, and Mayor Daley, former Chicago Mayor Daley, was the guest, and he talked about, we really need to get together with Chicago and even southeastern Wisconsin, because we need to start thinking of ourselves as regions all across Europe, Asia, globally. These region cities are building up. They are combining resources. They're getting economies of scale.
Regions.
Exactly.
Yeah. I preach this all the time.
We're still not thinking that way.
Regions.
Mayor, she almost wrote a beautiful essay. Her speech was more like an essay, talking to
Mayor Freeman Wilson.
Her vision was, you know, as Gary falls, so falls Lake and possibly Porter County. So this is why I voted for it. I'm not afraid of Peatone. I think we have great assets and resources here. Let's use this as another way to increase economic development.
You know, what's your take on this? Because we did a show a couple weeks ago about this whole thing right before the vote, and one of the comments that I made and the guests made was, this really was handled pretty well as a political issue. I mean, a lot of open dialogue, a lot of conversation, a lot of good thought.
It was.
Did you kind of see that too? I mean,
Yes.
did it seem like a healthy process to you?
I thought it was a nice microcosm of the region in many ways. It was handled surprisingly correctly, if you could say that, or properly in a way. It wasn't a lot of mudslinging,
Right.
like that kind of thing. And also, I thought it showed the bigger picture of our region, how we're fragmented, and different sides come to view, and you're battling out. And I was surprised that, for instance, somebody like the Gary mayor would be in favor of it. I expected McDermott to be against it. I expect people in the north big cities to be against it, and not from the south. I expect Lowell residents to be against it, and of course they were. They came out to all those meetings and voiced their concerns. But if you're thinking of a region again, and there's that buzzword region, I know you've been preaching it for a long time, but our region doesn't think regionally very well.
We still got that issue. Let's go back to the murder issues in Gary, and let me ask: do we spend too much time kind of focusing on those so that Gary continues to get this reputation of look at all the murders, look at all the murders, look at all the murders? And at some point, how do we balance that out of not keeping that in front of everybody?
How do we not note it, I guess, Keith?
Yeah.
I mean, let's say the Post-Tribune has a different tabloid style versus the Times, so to speak. So it depends how you play that. If you play it big in the headlines, and the Times is known for having these huge, massive headlines at times. Not too often, but I'm saying Gary murder rate high or whatever. Does that sensationalize it? Are we reporting the news, or are we kind of manipulating the news or massaging it? That's the question. We have to report it, right?
So what do you think?
Well, you know, I
think
think that in Gary's case, I think that you know, we have a very good ally of sorts. I mean, not that we should ever get too close to our sources and to public officials, but the Gary mayor is the most concerned of anyone about it. She's trying to bring businesses here, and every day we're writing news briefs about not just murders, but, you know, armed robbers broke into this place at 10 o'clock when they were shutting up. She too wants to get a handle on the murders, the death, the destruction, the loss, the drugs, the poverty, because that's her city.
How does
and
that
that's
make people, though, aware of? I mean, there's one thing is like you report it because, you know, how does that help citizens?
Well, look what she did. She asked the governor for help, and the governor and the Indiana State Police and other municipalities and police departments came together and gave a rather scathing view of how it's run,
along with the big fat
and processes. And now it is trickling out. They're continuing the meetings, good for Chief Ingram and the mayor, and they have done a lot of things to turn the department around.
So get some leverage.
And exactly, and change some resources. So she's handling the right way, and I think that shining a light on it maybe appears as critical of her, but actually is helping her, because we're also going to report on the good that comes of the reform she's trying to effect.
Well, that's good. So, another story.
How about something more talky? How about Spiro from the South Shore Convention Center of taking the South Shore Air Show? Which
Him being talky, or that's a talky story?
Both.
Both. I guess both. But taking it out of Lake County, out of Gary, because it has to go, and it's in Newton County at the farms.
Fair Oaks Farms.
Fair Oaks Farms.
Pigs are going to fly.
Pigs are going to fly. That's a talkative. I mean, I wrote about this on social media and in my column, and that I've heard so much feedback about this both ways. Well, at least we have an air show. It's somewhere in the region versus how dare you take it out of the county and use these kind of Lake County dollars from innkeeper's tax money, and why not Gary? Why not go to Hammond? Then Hammond says, Mayor McDermott says they bypassed us, but then the FAA, they say can't have the fly zone from Midway. It's all kinds of things going on.
And again, it's another points up the whole, odd regional. Spiros is acting regionally, but people who are in pockets of the region who don't approve.
Yeah, and they don't. When they don't approve, they don't approve.
Right.
Does that become the pinnacle story, though? Because that's really kind of an ongoing battle, the whole tourism turf thing.
It is. So, it's an example of that.
Yeah. So
it's 2013's example of that.
I agree.
That's what it is.
You're right, because we've had those stories year after year.
Of course we have.
Okay.
Can we play nice in the stand lot we call Northwest Indiana?
Right.
And at times we can't when it comes to tourism.
Right.
For whatever reason.
And this one is one of those that we don't play very nice with, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Right.
Another story from you.
I thought a fun one or a good one was
I think that's good.
Whole Foods coming to Northwest Indiana. I know a lot of us have long lamented that we have to make our quarterly pilgrimage to Orland Park to go to Trader Trader Joe's and the World Market and stock up on our wine. And I was, Trader Joe's does seem to have better prices, but Whole Foods is committed to coming. Although a friend of mine who used to work at the Times said, oh, well, you're in good company because Englewood, one of the poorest, sections of Chicago on the south side, is also getting a Whole Foods. But, props to Whole Foods because people in Northwest Indiana have emailed them, they've gone on the website, and it was sort of an informal lobby, and now they're coming. And so that's kind of a cool thing because, we've written about and there's been research done that good things happen to communities when Whole Foods comes.
This reminds me of the story from in a small town. It's like, did you hear we're going to have a McDonald's?
Yes,
exactly. We're going to get a McDonald's finally.
Exactly.
And it's the story for the whole year. I mean, it's the announcement of it. It's the breaking of the ground, and it just goes on forever.
But it could be an economic boon and an emotional boon because now we think we're even more urban than we were
exactly.
before, so to speak.
Or kind of high end.
Yeah, exactly, high end.
We've finally achieved this level.
Yes, the red-haired stepchild of the state. Look what we have.
And it's not to say that our other grocery stores don't carry good cheeses and wine, but it's just sort of the,
it's a brand name.
The brand.
It's a brand.
Yeah.
It's a brand. And with that brand.
How about another story from you?
How about the death of Rudy Clay, who passed away? That was a huge. That was a huge deal in the region, not only for the city of Gary, because he was controversial, but he was also very loved. Have you noticed that?
Yes, he was.
And it came out especially.
You wrote a lot about that.
I did. I met Rudy a couple of times in the past, and when you meet a guy like Rudy Clay, you like him.
And there were a lot of unlikely people who also liked him.
Yes, exactly. And that caught my attention that the region really kind of embraced it. People came out of the woodwork to say, I like Rudy.
Of all political stripes, all colors, all ethnic backgrounds.
And I wouldn't have thought
had a great story of their Rudy Clay friendship.
Did you guys think about anybody else who we lost this past year that was fairly significant?
Geez, Rudy stood out. Am I missing somebody?
I don't know.
I
just wonder.
Because the first thing I thought of was Rudy, to be honest. And I think that the reason why is because so many people, like you said, were not only surprised at his death, in a way, but they loved the guy.
Yes.
And they respected him a lot, regardless of his reputation and all that. And because he was like a caricature of himself in many ways.
Yes, and played off that.
Oh, he loved it. He embraced it.
Oh, yeah, he did. He really did.
That was his ace in the hole.
Yeah.
He loved it. So another one for you.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting that it's not just Lake County that had George Van Til resigned because he pleaded guilty to 6 counts of wire fraud for using Lake County equipment for campaign work.
Was that the most important story of?
No, but what I was going to go on is now the FBI is raiding Porter County and trying to get records pertaining to procurement. And things connected to their highway department. So whoever heard of the FBI going into Porter County for anything? So it's kind of interesting and kind of sad that, it seems to be spreading.
Because when the feds start knocking, things are rolling like a few months later.
And they're knocking on the door of the Lake Station mayor as well.
That's right.
Connected with his family. We don't really know, and I don't want to indict anyone. I do believe you're innocent until proven guilty. But I found all of that sort of interesting, that it isn't just Lake County anymore, sad to say.
Yeah, and I think George Van Til could be a poster child in many ways for this kind of thing that happens in Lake County, because I think in many ways he doesn't still think he's guilty.
Right.
He really doesn't. He thinks that he was doing like all the other public officials have been doing for decades, and he didn't do anything different. He just got nabbed for it. That's what he believes, I'm pretty sure.
Because he was doing his job well. And
it wasn't about that, right.
And you hear that from people. It's like, well, I didn't do anything wrong. I just got caught.
Right.
It's like, well, that's interesting. We're down to about 3 minutes, so you probably got a story apiece here that we got to jump on.
I think it's interesting, the sea change in attitudes even in Indiana, wanting gay people to live and let live and possibly even get married. And I'm wondering if the legislature is going to be able to put it into the state constitution, even though it's already state law.
That's
I don't think they're going to succeed.
That's going to be a 2014 story, isn't
it?
Big time. Yes. Big time. Keep a pulse on that, exactly.
Yeah.
So we'll look for that one next year.
On a more fun front, how about the Bacon Fest in Portage? That's the city where I live. A Bacon Fest? I mean, that was just funny.
Yeah.
And that caught, again, a lot of heat and a lot of jokes kind of thing, but that was something that caught my attention.
Bacon usually does catch a lot of heat.
Well, sorry, you're very good, you're very good. You'll be here all night, right?
Unless you coat it in chocolate and
tip
then
your
it's,
server, And how about the tornadoes that hit?
Oh, yes, I didn't even think
And how about the sports teams that won state championships, like Andrean recently won state championships, and Blackhawks. We're a lot of Blackhawks fans in the region. Sports is a big deal. And sports is one of the unifying factors of people who wouldn't normally sit at the same table or go to the same game.
That's
we could talk
Did you have a sports story at all?
I did not.
Okay.
That's my Achilles heel, sorry.
Well, that's
She's
okay.
newsy.
I can tell you all the operas at the Lyric Opera in Chicago, though.
There you go. How about
That's
Northwest
my
Indiana?
Achilles heel, yeah.
So besides the gay marriage issue, 2014, what are you predicting is out there next year? Just what are we going to look at besides taxes?
I'm thinking taxes big time again, because it's going to be talking, it's going to be rising. You know, people are going to know more about it. We're going to educate ourselves. And Obamacare, the Affordable
Yes,
Care Act,
Obamacare
that's a
definitely.
huge
We have
factor. We don't know how it's
880,000
gonna
people
play.
in Indiana without insurance. We can't get
And
the
it's still
Medicaid
it's hard to believe, but
funds.
it's still premature, this issue,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yes.
That really
right,
came kind of at
right.
the end of the year, and I think people are still trying to sort out
They
the
are.
fact
Yes, they
between
are.
fact and fiction on that,
Yes.
but hopefully we'll get more fact in 2014 on it.
Gary Airport Economic Development.
Yeah, what's going to happen with the airport? Is that private partnership?
Yeah, I think
be
it's
a
going to
boon
go
or not?
through. I think they're going to try and push for the South Shore extension.
And will they land another flyer again?
Yeah, I don't know.
Another airline? We don't know.
That's one to
Is that
watch
like,
for.
is that
Of
like
course it
heat
is.
to the bacon, land another
There you go.
airline?
You know all my
I'll
lines.
tell you, you're stepping right into them.
I am.
Well, we got some great stories to look forward to next year, and I enjoyed reading both papers and the writing you guys put out, and a lot of good stuff there. So
Thank you, Keith.
thanks for being here and sharing all this
Yes.
excitement.
Looking forward to 2014.
All right, thanks. Many of our conversations with friends, family, and associates begin with one of these phrases. Did you hear about, or did you read about? And then they complete the sentence. I'm not talking about gossip, rather communication with others about what they have learned through the media. What is so interesting to me is how we listen to these secondhand stories and then pass them on in our modified versions. Doesn't this remind you of that game of telephone we played as kids? I whispered to the person next to me a simple sentence such as, Tyrone bought a dog, he named it Fido and likes to feed it bones. By the time these few words are passed from person to person in the circle, the final announced message sounds something like, Tyrone brought his dog named Bilbo to the party, but he likes to feed it at home. All right, this is cute and funny as a game. It's not when the confused or misinterpreted communication is about the charges in an indictment, a report about child abuse, the financial details of a tax abatement offer, or a quoted stance on gay marriage. Bad information passed on is just that, bad. We already have enough that is unsubstantiated, conjecture, and opinion. Why do we need to add to the avalanche of communication that is already blowing our minds? We need to change a few of our habits. When that secondhand information is dropped upon you, ask the messenger to send you a copy, or ask for a web link so you can take a look at it. When you see it, read it closely and analyze it. You should also consider the source and check it out yourself. Is it a legitimate, fair-minded media source, or produced by an organization that has a solid reputation? Always allow yourself to have a first-hand review of the information so you can evaluate its validity and authenticity. Have it in your hands so you can accurately quote or share it with someone else. Let's set a 2014 resolution to be a seeker and conveyor of truth. Don't find yourself changing the name of Tyrone's dog or his eating habits. Take the time to get it right. After watching this show, what did you think the big stories of 2013 were? Did you agree with our guest? In 2014, we'd like to incorporate some of your thoughts into the program. So send us an email at focus@lakeshorepublicmedia.org or reach us through our website, which is listed on your screen. Join us next week for another Lakeshore Focus. I'm Keith Kirkpatrick saying, make a positive difference in our world today and have a happy holiday.